Wife lied that our son is in the hospital to keep me from going on the family cruise. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wife said our son was in the hospital, so I stayed behind. But when I found out the truth, what she was really doing, I knew everything had changed. What would you do if your entire family turned against you? Keep watching to see the shocking twist that will leave you speechless. You won't believe how it ends. I was standing in the middle of the bedroom, folding the last of my shirts into the suitcase, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Emily. Her timing was odd. Normally she'd call earlier in the day to confirm some last-minute details. Maybe ask if I'd remembered to pack our son's favorite book, or the sunscreen she bought for the trip. This time, though, something in her voice stopped me cold. There was a tremor, an edge I hadn't heard before. "You have to stay," she said, her words rushing out so fast I almost didn't catch them. "Ryan's in the hospital. He needs you." My stomach dropped. I could barely choke out the words, "What happened?" as my hand froze mid-fold. She hesitated, then said, "It's bad. He was fine this morning, but then he collapsed. I thought it was nothing serious, but now." Her voice cracked, and I could hear the panic, the raw fear in her breathing. "You need to come." My whole body went cold. I looked down at the suitcase, at the neatly folded stacks of clothes that suddenly felt meaningless. 1,000 thoughts shot through my mind all at once. How had I missed it? He'd been so happy this morning, bouncing around the living room with his little paper boat, talking about how he was going to sail it on the hotel pool. I couldn't even remember him coughing, let alone looking sick. But now she was telling me he was in a hospital bed? My knees felt weak, and I had to steady myself against the bed frame. "Which hospital?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "I'll be right there." She gave me the name of the medical center, and I didn't wait another second. I zipped the suitcase shut and shoved it aside, grabbed my car keys, and rushed out the door. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the key fob, the edges of my vision blurring as panic took over. I kept replaying the morning in my head, Ryan laughing, running in circles, showing me that little paper boat he was so proud of. Had I been so distracted by work, by packing, by this trip I'd been planning for weeks that I missed the signs? The thought gnawed at me, making me sick. How had I let my son get so sick without even noticing? I gripped the steering wheel tighter as I sped toward the hospital. The traffic seemed unbearable, every red light stretching on forever. All I could think about was Ryan lying there, small and helpless, his bright little smile replaced by an oxygen mask or IV lines. It didn't seem real. None of it seemed real. My pulse was pounding by the time I reached the hospital parking lot. I practically ran through the sliding doors, my shoes squeaking on the tile as I rushed up to the front desk. "My son Ryan Miller. He was brought in earlier. I need to see him." The woman behind the desk frowned, her fingers moving slowly over the keyboard as if each keystroke was designed to test my patience. Finally, she looked up. "I'm sorry, sir. We don't have anyone by that name admitted today." "What?" The word came out too loud, and heads turned. There has to be some mistake. "My wife just called me. She said she brought him in." She shook her head, her expression softening as if she thought I was some confused parent who had shown up at the wrong place. "I'm sorry. Maybe you should call her again?" I stepped back from the counter, my heart racing. Maybe she'd taken him to another hospital. That had to be it. I pulled out my phone and hit her number. It rang twice before going to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. That's when the notification popped up on my screen. My hand froze as I saw it. A picture of Emily, standing on a sunlit cruise deck, a drink in hand, sunglasses perched on her nose. She was smiling, standing close to her family, her sister, her parents. And right next to her, his arm casually draped around her waist, was Colin. The caption hit me like a punch to the gut. "Best vacation ever." I stared at the screen, my pulse roaring in my ears. Ryan wasn't in the hospital. He was fine. He wasn't the reason she called me. She'd lied. Emily had lied. I didn't even realize my fingers were tightening around the phone until my knuckles turned white. My entire body trembled, a mix of shock, betrayal, and a rage I couldn't contain. She never wanted me on that trip. She'd gone to unforgivable lengths to make sure I stayed behind. My hands trembled as I stared at the image on my phone. Emily, standing there on that deck, sun-drenched and carefree, was a stark contrast to the voice I'd heard earlier on the phone. I had heard panic, desperation, and fear. I had heard a mother's plea for help. But this picture, this smiling, laughing woman surrounded by her family, and Colin told a very different story. My brain struggled to process it, as if my thoughts were tripping over each other. How could she do this? Why would she do this? The questions hammered in my head, each one heavier than the last. I felt like a fool. She had lied about Ryan, about everything, and I had fallen for it completely. I stumbled back to my car, barely aware of my own movements. The hospital parking lot blurred around me. I sank into the driver's seat, clutching the phone like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. My thoughts spiraled as I replayed her words in my mind. Ryan's in the hospital. He needs you. She had said it so convincingly, her voice cracking, her breath hitching. I would have bet my life that she was telling the truth. But she hadn't just lied, she'd woven an elaborate, calculated story designed to keep me away. She had deliberately pushed me out of that trip, out of her life, so she could parade around with Colin in front of her family. And Ryan? My son? He was never in danger, he was never sick. She had used my love for him to manipulate me. The betrayal was like a knife to the gut, twisting deeper with every passing second. The anger began to boil beneath the shock, hot and relentless. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I couldn't believe she had done this. Emily wasn't just my wife, she was someone I had trusted completely. Someone I had built a life with, shared a home with, raised a child with. And now? Now she was off on a luxury cruise, laughing with another man while I sat here, blindsided and humiliated. I wanted answers. I wanted to confront her, to hear her try to explain herself. But every time I tried calling, it went straight to voicemail. She was ignoring me. Of course she was. She'd gotten what she wanted, I was out of the picture, and she was free to enjoy herself. I needed to know more. This wasn't just a moment of frustration or a fleeting act of deceit. This was premeditated. She had planned this for weeks, maybe months. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision, she had carefully orchestrated it. Knowing exactly how to push my buttons, how to make me react. The realization made me sick. My trust, my faith in her, had been nothing more than a tool she used to control me. I felt the betrayal like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. It wasn't just about the trip. It wasn't even just about Colin. It was about how she had torn down the foundation of our marriage, brick by brick, without me even noticing. I drove aimlessly for a while, my thoughts racing too fast for me to focus on where I was going. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets. Eventually, I found myself in a quiet parking lot at the edge of town. I turned off the engine and sat there, staring at the steering wheel, my mind a whirlwind of anger and confusion. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't just sit back and let her get away with it. But what could I do? How could I fight back against someone who had been planning this behind my back for so long? I didn't even know where to start. Then it hit me, Ryan. He was the only thing that mattered. If she was willing to lie about something as serious as him being in the hospital, what else was she capable of? I had to make sure he was okay. I had to protect him from whatever twisted game she was playing. I grabbed my phone again and checked his school schedule. It was late, but not so late that I couldn't stop by and talk to someone, his teacher, the principal, anyone who could give me some peace of mind. I needed to know he was safe. More than that, I needed to see him, to hold him, to remind myself that he was real and okay. When I arrived at the school, the lights in the office were still on. I stepped inside, the cool air conditioning hitting me like a shock. The receptionist looked up from her desk, surprised to see someone at this hour. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but cautious. "My son," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Noah Miller. Is he still here? Is he okay?" She frowned slightly, probably wondering why I seemed so panicked. "He's fine," she said after a brief pause. "He's in his classroom. Is something wrong?" I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He was okay. He was fine. That knowledge brought me a fleeting moment of relief. But it was quickly overshadowed by the burning anger still simmering inside me. I shook my head. "No, nothing's wrong. I needed to be sure." She nodded slowly, clearly sensing that there was more to the story but wisely choosing not to pry. "Would you like me to call him up?" she asked. I almost said yes. I wanted to see him so badly, to hug him and hear his voice. But I didn't want to disrupt his evening routine. No, I said quietly. Let him finish his day. I'll see him at home. As I walked back to my car, the relief of knowing he was safe was quickly overshadowed by the realization of what Emily had done. She had lied about Noah's health. She had lied to my face, knowing exactly how I'd react. I had been ready to drop everything, to rush to his side, and she had exploited that instinct without a second thought. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. I felt like a fool. A blind, naive fool. I sat in the driver's seat again, staring at my phone. A notification popped up, another photo from the cruise. This one showed Emily and Colin standing even closer, their smiles impossibly wide. He had his arm around her shoulder, and she wasn't pulling away. She looked radiant, happy, like someone who hadn't just told her husband that their child was in the hospital. My stomach churned. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just a moment of bad judgment. This was who she was now. Someone who could lie, manipulate, and betray without hesitation. Someone who could smile and laugh while I was sitting here, consumed by worry and fear. I felt the heat rise in my chest, anger bubbling up until it threatened to spill over. She thought she could get away with it. She thought I'd just accept it, that I'd be too stunned to do anything. But she was wrong. I wasn't going to let this slide. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. I started piecing it together. The lies, the stolen money, the sudden excuses, it all pointed to one gut-wrenching conclusion. What do you think I discovered next? Type 1 if you think she'll admit everything. Or 2 if you think she'll deny it all and fight back. I want to hear your thoughts. I drove home in silence, my mind a chaotic storm of anger, betrayal, and confusion. The streets were dark now, lit only by the cold, steady glow of the streetlights. I could barely focus on the road ahead. My hands clenched the steering wheel tighter as the questions kept hitting me. How long had she been lying to me? How deep did this go? This wasn't just about one vacation or one phone call. This was something bigger, something she'd been planning for weeks, maybe months. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me, and every memory I had of our family felt tainted now. Every moment colored by the possibility that it was all a lie. My stomach twisted as I thought about the money, the trips, the house, all of it. Where was the money coming from? And more importantly, where was it going? By the time I pulled into the driveway, the anger was bubbling under my skin, hot and insistent. The house stood there, dark and silent, like it was waiting for me to come inside and face whatever was left. I parked, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment, staring at the front door. I used to love this house. The way it felt like a sanctuary after a long day, a place where I could laugh with my wife and watch my son grow up. But now, it felt like a stranger's home, like I'd walked into someone else's life, a life I didn't recognize anymore. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I needed answers. I needed to know what she'd been hiding from me. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive. I dropped my keys on the counter, ignoring the neat row of family pictures on the wall. I couldn't look at them, not now. They felt like mockery, smiling faces frozen in time. Back when I thought we were happy. Back when I thought everything was fine. I walked into the living room, where the laptop sat on the coffee table. The light from the screen was the only illumination, casting a cold blue glow across the room. My pulse quickened as I sat down and opened the bank account. The familiar login screen stared back at me. My hands hovered over the keyboard for a moment, trembling slightly, before I typed in my credentials. The account balance flashed on the screen. My stomach sank. The numbers didn't add up. There was far less money in our savings than there should have been. I clicked through the recent transactions, scanning the list of withdrawals. Large sums had been pulled out, one after the other. The pit in my stomach grew deeper as I kept scrolling. Most of them were labeled as household expenses, but the amounts didn't make sense, thousands of dollars disappearing at a time. Then I saw it. A series of transfers to a separate account. An account I didn't recognize. An account that wasn't ours. I leaned back, the blood pounding in my ears. She had been funneling money out of our savings. She had been doing it for months, right under my nose. I rubbed my hands over my face. trying to steady my breathing. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a pattern, a deliberate act. I felt the weight of it pressing down on me. She had been planning this for a long time, long before she called me that day. Long before I thought anything was wrong. I stared at the screen, my mind spinning. What else had I missed? What else had she been doing behind my back? I opened the credit card statements next. My heart sank even further as I saw the charges. High-end restaurants, luxury shopping, a 5-star resort. And then the kicker, a down payment on a house. My chest tightened. I clicked on the transaction details, my eyes scanning every line. The recipient was a real estate agency. She hadn't just stolen money from me. She had taken that money and used it to buy a house. Not a family home. Not a home for us. A home for herself. I swallowed hard, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. She had been planning her escape. She had been preparing for life without me long before I even suspected anything. She had drained our savings, funded her luxury lifestyle, and secured a new place for herself, probably a place where she and Colin could live happily ever after. Without me in the picture, the anger burned hotter, surging through me like wildfire. I slammed the laptop shut and leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, my hands clasped tightly together. I couldn't believe how blind I'd been. I had trusted her completely. I had worked long hours, sacrificed my time, all so I could provide for our family. And she had used that trust against me. I felt like a fool. A blind, naive fool. I needed to know more. I couldn't let this stand. I grabbed my phone and called Marcus. He picked up after a few rings, his voice groggy. "Hey, man. What's going on?" "I need your help," I said, my voice low and steady. "It's Emily. She's been stealing from me." "What?" Marcus sounded wide awake now. "What are you talking about?" "She's been draining our savings. She bought a house. I have the proof, but I need more. I need to know how far this goes." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then Marcus's voice came back, firm and determined. "Give me a couple of hours. I'll see what I can find." I hung up, my grip tightening around the phone. I stared at the dark screen, my thoughts racing. Marcus had connections, lawyers, private investigators. Guys who could dig into just about anything. If anyone could help me uncover the full scope of what Emily had done, it was him. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but everything in my gut told me there was more to this. I had only scratched the surface. If she had gone to these lengths lying about Ryan, stealing our money, buying a house, what else was she hiding? I needed to know. I needed to be prepared. I stood up, pacing the room as I waited. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, the silence too loud. My mind wouldn't stop racing. I thought about Ryan, his innocent smile, his bright eyes. He had no idea what was going on. He didn't know his mother had betrayed us, didn't know she was planning to leave us. I had to protect him. No matter what, I had to make sure he was safe. I couldn't let her drag him into her mess. He deserved better than this. We both did. I clenched my jaw, my resolve hardening. I wasn't going to let her destroy everything I'd worked so hard to build. I was going to find out the truth, no matter what it took. I hadn't slept at all the night before, but somehow, the adrenaline kept me going. I couldn't get the image out of my head. Emily standing on that cruise deck, smiling, while my life unraveled one lie at a time. The house was quiet that morning, as if it knew everything had changed. I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop open in front of me, staring at the numbers. I had spent half the night going over every bank statement, every credit card charge, every single detail. The money was gone more than I thought. Actually, it wasn't just a few $1,000s. It was tens of thousands, slowly bled out of our accounts over months. I'd been too focused on work, too busy trusting her to handle the finances. I had handed her the keys to our future, and she had sold it off piece by piece. And for what? A down payment on a new life, one that didn't include me. My phone buzzed next to me, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was Marcus. "Hey man," he said, his voice steady. "I've got something for you." "Tell me," I said, leaning back in the chair, trying to brace myself. I pulled some records from her email account, the one she didn't think you'd ever look at. She's been communicating with a lawyer, a divorce lawyer. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just stared at the wall, the weight of those words settling in. I had known it was coming, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way I wasn't ready for. Anything else? I finally asked, my voice calm but cold. Yeah, Marcus said. She's not just talking divorce. She's talking custody. She's been building a case against you. Emails to her family, statements about how you're too busy with work, how you're not around enough. She's trying to paint herself as the primary caregiver. I closed my eyes, the anger bubbling back up. That's bullshit, I said through gritted teeth. She's the one who's been gone half the time. She's the one who lied about Ryan being sick just to get rid of me. And now she thinks she can take him away from me? I know, Marcus said. I'm just telling you what I found. You need to move fast though. She hasn't filed anything yet, but she's close. You need a lawyer. A good one. I'm working on it, I said. The gears in my mind already turning. Thanks, Marcus. I appreciate it. I hung up and sat there, staring at my laptop. The evidence was piling up. Emily wasn't just leaving me, she was trying to destroy me. She was setting herself up to walk away with everything: our money, our house, and worst of all, our son. She was willing to rip him away from me, to rewrite history so that she came out looking like the victim. I couldn't let that happen. Ryan deserved better than this. He deserved stability, love, and a parent who actually cared about him, not someone who would use him as a pawn in their game. I reached out to a divorce attorney, Michelle Langston. Marcus had recommended her, and from everything I'd heard, she was one of the best. We scheduled a meeting for later that afternoon. I spent the next few hours gathering every document I could think of: bank statements, credit card records, emails, screenshots of the cruise photos. I needed to be prepared. I needed to show that Emily wasn't the innocent mother she was pretending to be. When I finally sat down with Michelle, she didn't waste any time. Let me guess, she said, flipping through the documents I'd brought. She's been slowly draining your accounts, building a new life, and now she wants custody. That's about right, I said, leaning forward. I can't let her take Ryan. Do you have any proof that you're the primary caregiver? She asked, her pen poised over her notebook. I'm always the one who takes him to school, to his doctor's appointments. I'm the one who helps him with his homework, who shows up at his soccer games. Emily's been distracted, to say the least. Michelle nodded. Okay, we'll need to document all of that. Statements from his teachers, his coach, anyone who can back you up. And you'll need to be prepared for her to make accusations against you. What kind of accusations? I asked, my stomach tightening. Neglect, emotional unavailability, anything that makes you look like you're not capable of raising him on your own, she said matter-of-factly. But if we can prove that she's been the one lying, manipulating, and frankly stealing, we can shift the narrative. She lied about him being in the hospital, I said, just to keep me from going on that trip. That's a good start, Michelle said, jotting something down. We'll use that. As I left her office, I felt a mixture of hope and dread. I had a plan now, a way to fight back. But the road ahead was going to be brutal. Emily wasn't just my wife, she was someone I had shared a life with, someone I had loved. And now I was about to go to war with her, to expose every lie she'd ever told, to fight for the one thing that mattered most: Ryan. I couldn't afford to lose. This wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about protecting my son, about giving him the kind of life he deserved. As I drove home, the house loomed in the distance, dark and silent once again. I parked, took a deep breath, and walked inside. There was no turning back now. I sat in the kitchen, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, as I stared at the pile of papers in front of me. Every document I had gathered was there: bank statements, showing Emily's withdrawals, credit card records highlighting her lavish expenses, screenshots of her smiling on the cruise deck with Colin. I felt like I was piecing together a puzzle I didn't even know existed. The more I looked at the evidence, the more it became clear. She had been planning this for a long time. She wasn't just walking away, she was building a new life. One that didn't include me or, by the looks of it, my involvement in Ryan's life either. My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me from my thoughts. I grabbed it and saw Marcus's name on the screen. What did you find? I asked, skipping any pleasantries. I dug a little deeper, he said. She's been moving more than just the money you noticed. There's another account under her maiden name. She's been shifting funds there for months. And there's more. She's been in contact with another lawyer. Not just a divorce attorney. She's talking to a custody lawyer, too. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. A custody lawyer. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like they belonged to someone else's story, not mine. What's she saying? She's claiming you're absent, Marcus continued, his voice grim. That you're always working, that you're too busy to be a hands-on parent. She's painting herself as the primary caregiver. That's bullshit, I snapped. My voice echoed in the empty kitchen, sharp and angry. She's the one who's been lying. She's the one who's been sneaking around. I know, Marcus said calmly. But she's banking on you not having your side of the story lined up. She thinks you'll just roll over. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to think. She's been setting this up for months. Building a case against me. I need to fight back. You've already got a start, Marcus said. You're working with Michelle. Get her everything you can, proof that you've been the one taking Ryan to school, going to his games, showing up for his life. The more you can show you're the stable parent, the better chance you have. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Thanks, Marcus. The first owe you. You don't owe me anything, he replied. Just take care of your son. When I hung up, the weight of the situation hit me all over again. I wasn't just dealing with a betrayal, I was facing a battle for my son. I stared at the stack of papers, my mind racing. Ryan had always been my priority. Even when I worked late, even when I was exhausted, I made sure I was there for him, reading bedtime stories, helping with school projects, cheering him on at soccer games. I wasn't perfect, but I showed up. I was present. And now Emily was trying to erase all of that, to rewrite our history so she could walk away with Ryan and leave me behind. I knew I needed more evidence. If she was going to accuse me of being absent, I had to prove the opposite. I grabbed my laptop and began combing through every email, every photo, every document I could find. I looked for emails from Ryan's teachers praising my involvement, pictures of us together at school events, messages from his coach thanking me for volunteering. I gathered everything into a folder, methodically and carefully. I wasn't going to let her spin her story without a fight. The hours passed in a blur. I barely noticed the sunlight fading, the room growing darker. My focus was entirely on building my case, on making sure I had every piece of evidence I could get. By the time I looked at the clock, it was nearly midnight. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, and my shoulders ached from tension. But I couldn't stop. Not yet. I had to be ready. I had to protect Ryan. When I finally leaned back in my chair, exhausted, I felt a small sense of accomplishment. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I saved the folder to a flash drive and slipped it into my pocket. I would give it to Michelle tomorrow and see what else she needed. I knew this was just the beginning, but I was ready. I wasn't going to let Emily win. I wasn't going to let her take Ryan from me. I sat there in the quiet kitchen, my mind still racing. I had trusted Emily for years. I had built a life with her, built a family. But now I saw her for who she really was. And I wasn't going to let her destroy everything I had worked so hard for. I took a deep breath and stood up. Tomorrow was a new day, and I was ready to fight for what mattered most. By the next morning, the house was filled with a silence that felt heavier than it had before. I sat at the kitchen table again, coffee growing cold in front of me. The folder I'd put together last night sat nearby, waiting for my meeting with Michelle. My mind was still racing with everything I'd uncovered. Emily's lies, her manipulation, her calculated plan to leave me and take Ryan, it all swirled in my head like a storm that refused to settle. I couldn't shake the image of her on that cruise, laughing and carefree, while I had been at home scrambling to pick up the pieces. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the realization that she'd been planning it all while looking me in the eye, acting like nothing was wrong. I tried to focus on what I needed to do next. I had the evidence, but I needed more support. If Emily was building a narrative that I was absent, I had to prove the opposite. Ryan's teachers were a good start, but I knew I needed other witnesses, people who saw me at school events, neighbors who knew how involved I was, maybe even our friends who had seen me take care of Ryan day in and day out. I started making a list, jotting down names and contact information. I'd never been one to ask for help, but this was different. This was about protecting my son. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Michelle. Bring everything you have. We'll review it and plan our next steps. I grabbed the folder and my keys. trying to shake the nerves that crept up as I headed out the door. This was the first time I'd ever needed a lawyer for anything. The idea of sitting in an office, talking about custody battles and financial disputes, felt surreal. But I couldn't afford to waste time feeling overwhelmed. I had to be ready. When I arrived at Michelle's office, the receptionist greeted me with a polite smile and motioned for me to sit in the waiting area. The room was quiet, decorated with neutral colors and soft lighting that did nothing to calm the knot in my stomach. I sat down and glanced around, feeling like a stranger in someone else's world. I thought about how things had been just a few weeks ago, how I'd been planning a family vacation, thinking everything was fine. And now I was in a lawyer's office, preparing to fight my own wife for custody of our son. The anger bubbled up again, but I tried to push it down. I needed a clear head. Michelle's voice broke through my thoughts as she stepped into the waiting room. "Lucas," she said, her tone professional but warm. "Come on back." I followed her into her office, clutching the folder like it was a lifeline. Her desk was covered in neat stacks of papers and files, and I could tell she had done this 1,000 times before. She gestured for me to sit down, and I placed the folder on her desk. "Let's start with what you've got," she said, opening the folder and flipping through the contents. "You've done a lot of work here. This is good." These bank statements show a clear pattern of her withdrawing large sums over several months. The screenshots from the cruise photos help establish that she wasn't where she said she was. And the school records show that you've been actively involved in Ryan's life. This is exactly what we need. I felt a small sense of relief as she spoke, like I wasn't completely drowning anymore. "What else do we need?" I asked. Michelle glanced up at me. "We need character witnesses. People who can vouch for you as a father. Teachers, coaches, neighbors, anyone who's seen you with Ryan. The more statements we have, the stronger your case becomes." I nodded. "I've started making a list. I'll reach out to them today." "Good," she said. "We'll also need to anticipate her strategy. If she's going to argue that you're absent, she'll likely bring up your work schedule. We need to show that, despite working full-time, you've always been present and involved." "She's the one who's been gone," I said, the frustration clear in my voice. "She lied about Ryan being in the hospital. She's been planning this for months. How does she think she's going to get away with it?" Michelle leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "She's counting on you not fighting back. She thinks she can control the narrative. But with what you've brought me and the witnesses will line up, we have a solid foundation. This isn't going to be easy, but it's winnable." Hearing her say that made something shift inside me. I felt a flicker of hope, a reminder that I wasn't powerless. I still had a chance to protect Ryan, to make sure he wasn't dragged into whatever chaos Emily was trying to create. I leaned forward, my voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes. Just tell me what I need to do." Michelle gave a small nod. "We'll take it one step at a time. For now, keep gathering evidence. Keep documenting everything. And start talking to those witnesses. We'll reconvene once we have more statements." I left her office feeling more prepared than I had in days. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a start. I drove back home, the folder sitting on the passenger seat like a constant reminder of what I was fighting for. Ryan's school was just letting out when I got back, and I parked near the playground. Watching as the kids poured out of the building, I spotted Ryan among them. His backpack slung over one shoulder, his face lit up as he waved at his friends. For a moment, everything felt normal. I got out of the car and walked toward him, his smile growing wider when he saw me. "Hey, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "How was school?" "Good," he said, bouncing on his toes. "We learned about rockets today. Did you know they use liquid fuel and solid fuel?" I smiled. "Sounds like you're ready to build your own spaceship." "Maybe one day," he said with a laugh. "Can we stop for ice cream on the way home?" I hesitated for a moment. There was so much going on, so much I needed to do, but looking at him, seeing that pure, untainted happiness made me realize what was most important. "Sure, buddy. Ice cream sounds good." As we walked back to the car, one couldn't help but think about what Michelle had said. I wasn't going to let Emily control the narrative. I wasn't going to let her take Ryan from me. No matter how long it took or how hard it got, I was going to fight for my son. And looking at him now, I knew I had something worth fighting for. It was late when I finally got home. The house quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, I dropped my keys on the counter and stared at the stack of papers I'd left there earlier. The evidence was all neatly organized now, but looking at it still sent a jolt through me. It wasn't just paper, it was the proof of Emily's betrayal, of her calculated effort to dismantle everything we'd built together. I took a deep breath and leaned against the kitchen counter, running a hand through my hair. It felt like the calm before a storm. I had done everything I could to prepare. Now it was just a matter of time. The silence in the house felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were bracing for what was coming. I walked into the living room, turning on a single lamp. The soft light fell on the family photos lined up on the bookshelf. There we were, smiling on a beach vacation, Ryan in my arms, Emily standing beside me. I couldn't look at it anymore. I turned the frame face down and sank into the couch, my hands clasped in front of me. How had we ended up here? How had she gone from the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, to someone who could lie so easily, who could steal from me, who could try to take my son away? The questions spun in my mind, and no matter how many times I tried to answer them, I came up empty. I closed my eyes, just for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks. I had met with Michelle, gathered witness statements, and documented everything. Every withdrawal, every false claim, every lie. I had it all laid out. I thought I was ready, but the reality of what I was about to do still hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't just confronting Emily. I was tearing apart what was left of my family. But I didn't have a choice. She had forced my hand. The sound of tires on the driveway pulled me from my thoughts. I opened my eyes, my pulse quickening. She was home. I stood up, taking a deep breath. My hands trembled slightly, but I clenched them into fists and steadied myself. This wasn't the time to second guess. I had to be strong. I walked over to the front door and waited, listening to the sound of her footsteps as she came closer. The door opened, and there she was, standing in the doorway like nothing had happened. She had a faint smile on her face, like she was expecting everything to be normal. But this wasn't normal anymore. "Hey," she said, stepping inside. "How was your day?" I stared at her, not saying a word. My silence made her falter, her smile fading slightly. She closed the door behind her, setting her bag down on the floor. "Lucas, is everything okay? Why don't you tell me?" I said, my voice calm but cold. Her eyes flicked to my face, searching for clues, and I could see the moment she realized something was wrong. Her smile disappeared completely, replaced by a nervous frown. "What's going on?" she asked, taking a step closer. I didn't move. "I know, Emily." Her face went pale, and she froze in place. What do you mean?" she stammered. "I know about the money. I know about the house. I know about the custody plan." My words came out steady and firm, each one hitting her like a blow. "I know you've been lying to me, stealing from me, trying to take Ryan away from me." She shook her head, taking a step back. "No, you don't understand, don't," I said sharply, cutting her off. "Don't lie to me again. I have the proof. I have everything." She looked at me, her eyes wide and her hands trembling. For a moment, it seemed like she might try to argue. But then her shoulders sagged, and she let out a shaky breath. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I let out a bitter laugh. "Didn't mean to hurt me? You lied about Ryan being in the hospital. You took my money. You planned a new life behind my back. What exactly did you mean to do, Emily?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. "I was scared," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to leave." "Leave?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You didn't just leave. You burned everything down on your way out. You used Ryan as a pawn, Emily. You used our son to keep me away while you ran off with Colin. You used him to cover your tracks. How could you do that?" She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice muffled. "I know I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I shot back. "This wasn't a mistake, Emily. This was a plan. This was months in the making. You knew exactly what you were doing." She lowered her hands, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Lucas," she said, her voice pleading. "We can talk about this. We can figure it out." I shook my head, my jaw tight. There's nothing to figure out. You made your choice. You lied. You stole. You tried to take Ryan from me. You don't get to come back from that. The weight of my words seemed to hit her all at once, and she sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. I stood there for a moment, watching her, feeling a strange mix of anger, sadness, and relief. I had finally said everything I needed to say. I had finally confronted her. I took a deep breath, the air feeling heavier in my lungs. It wasn't over yet, but I had taken the first step. I turned and walked toward the hallway, leaving her sitting there alone. I knew this was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over, but I also knew that I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her take Ryan from me. No matter what it took, I was going to protect my son. I was going to fight for what mattered most. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, leaning against the wall, and trying to catch my breath. My chest was tight, my fists clenched at my sides. The sound of Emily's quiet sobs drifted through the house, muffled but still sharp enough to cut through the silence. I wanted to feel relief. I wanted to feel like I'd finally gained some ground, that I had taken the first steps toward getting my life back. But all I could feel was the weight of what was coming next. I knew she wasn't just going to sit there and accept it. Emily was clever, she always had been, and now that her lies were out in the open, she'd be scrambling to figure out her next move. That thought made my stomach churn. I couldn't afford to let my guard down, not for a second. I had to stay ahead of her. I had to be ready. The hallway was dimly lit, the faint glow from the kitchen spilling into the space. I pushed off the wall and started walking toward Ryan's room. I stopped just outside his door, listening. His soft, steady breathing came through the wood, a comforting rhythm that reminded me why I was doing all of this. Ryan was what mattered. Not the money, not the house, not even the betrayal, just him. I had to protect him from all of this, shield him from the chaos that was swirling around us. I reached for the doorknob but stopped myself. I didn't want to wake him. Instead, I just stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath and letting the sound of his breathing calm the storm inside me. When I finally moved away from the door, I headed back to the living room. Emily was still on the couch, her head in her hands. She didn't look up as I walked in. Her shoulders were hunched, her whole body seeming smaller somehow. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, staring at her, waiting for her to acknowledge me. When she finally did look up, her eyes were red and swollen, her face pale. "Lucas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't even know what to say." "Don't," I replied sharply. "I don't want to hear it. You said everything you needed to say when you lied to me, when you took everything behind my back. I'm done listening to your excuses." Her lip trembled, but she nodded slowly. "I know I messed up," she said, her voice cracking. "But please, can we just talk about this? Can we try to figure something out?" "Figure something out?" I scoffed. "What's left to figure out, Emily? You didn't just mess up. You didn't just make a mistake. You planned this. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you did it anyway. How am I supposed to figure anything out with someone I can't trust?" I thought. She started, then stopped, shaking her head. "I thought I could handle it. I thought I could make it work." "Make it work?" I repeated, my anger flaring again. "You thought you could make it work by stealing from me? By lying about Ryan being sick? By sneaking around and trying to take him away from me?" Her shoulders shook, and she buried her face in her hands again. "I didn't know what else to do," she said through her tears. "I was scared, Lucas. I was scared, and I didn't know how to fix things." I stared at her, my jaw tight. "You didn't even try," I said, my voice low but sharp. "You didn't come to me. You didn't talk to me. You just decided on your own that this was the only way. You didn't give me a chance. You just took it all and left me standing here wondering what the hell happened." She looked up at me, her eyes desperate. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I never wanted it to get this bad." I crossed my arms, shaking my head. "You can't just say you're sorry and expect everything to go back to normal. It doesn't work that way." "I don't know what else to say," she whispered. "I don't know how to make it right." "You can't make it right," I said. "Not after everything you've done. The only thing you can do now is accept the consequences." Her face crumpled, and she turned away, staring at the floor. I felt a flicker of something sympathy, maybe, but I pushed it down. I couldn't let myself feel sorry for her. Not after what she'd done. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. I walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. The faint glow of the streetlights barely reached the house, leaving the yard in shadow. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air from the window soothe my anger. After a long moment, I turned back to her. "This isn't just about us," I said. "This is about Ryan. He deserves better than this. He deserves parents who put him first, who don't drag him through a mess like this. And right now, I'm the only one who can give him that." She flinched at my words, her hands gripping the edge of the couch. "I love him too," she said, her voice trembling. "I made mistakes, but I love him." "If you loved him," I shot back, "you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied about him, used him to manipulate me, tried to take him away. Love isn't just words, Emily. It's actions. And your actions have shown me exactly what you care about. Yourself." Her head snapped up, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But then she slumped back against the couch, defeated. "I don't know how to fix this," she said softly. "You can't fix this," I replied. "But you can stop making it worse. You can stop lying. You can stop trying to take Ryan away from me. You can let me be the parent he needs." She didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at the floor, her hands limp in her lap. I watched her for a moment longer, then turned and walked away. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep standing there, waiting for her to say something that would make it all better. She had already shown me who she was. And I had made my decision. I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. I was going to protect Ryan, no matter what it took. The house was quieter than it had been in days. Emily had finally left. She'd packed her things and walked out. Her shoulders hunched under the weight of everything she'd done. I stood at the window, watching her car pull away, and for the first time, I felt the weight lifting off my chest. It wasn't a victory, not yet. But it was the first step toward rebuilding my life. I turned back to the living room. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the house. The mess she'd left behind, seemed almost symbolic. The coffee table was cluttered with papers and books she hadn't bothered to put away, and a sweater she'd thrown over the arm of the couch still clung there, as if it hadn't gotten the message that she was gone. I walked over, picked it up, and tossed it into the nearest box. I didn't want anything of hers lying around anymore. This house was mine now, mine and Ryan's. Ryan. My heart ached at the thought of him. I'd done everything I could to keep him safe, to shield him from the chaos Emily had created. But I knew the real battle was just beginning. She was still out there, still determined to fight me for custody, still clinging to the idea that she could somehow make her version of the story stick. I had the truth on my side, but I also knew the courts didn't always care about the truth. They cared about who had the better evidence, the better lawyer, the better narrative. And I wasn't going to let her win. I walked into Ryan's room, leaning against the doorframe as I watched him sleep. His little body rose and fell with each breath, his face peaceful and untroubled. He had no idea what was happening. No idea that his mother had lied to us, betrayed us, and tried to take him away from me. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. He deserved better than this, better than me. Better than the mess I'd let our lives become. But then I reminded myself that I wasn't the one who'd broken our family. I wasn't the one who'd chosen lies and deceit over honesty and love. I was just the one left to pick up the pieces. I stepped back, careful not to wake him, and walked to the kitchen. I poured myself a cup of coffee, even though it was late. I needed the caffeine to keep me focused. Tomorrow would be a long day, another meeting with Michelle, more paperwork to file, more evidence to gather. It felt like my life had turned into one endless pile of documents and phone calls. But every piece of paper, every statement, every email I dug up was one more weapon in my arsenal. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for Ryan. And I was determined to win. I sat down at the kitchen table, flipping through the folder of documents Michelle had asked me to compile. Bank statements, credit card bills, text messages, screenshots of social media posts, it was all there. Each piece of evidence told a story, and that story painted Emily as a liar and a manipulator. It wasn't just about the money she'd stolen, or the lies she'd told about Ryan's health. It was about the pattern of behavior that showed she wasn't fit to be the primary caregiver. She had chosen her own selfish desires over her responsibilities as a mother, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The night dragged on, and I barely noticed the time passing. The coffee grew cold, but I kept working, kept organizing, kept preparing. I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Emily was smart, and she was desperate. I knew she'd try every trick in the book to paint me as the bad guy. She'd call me absent, say I worked too much, say I wasn't involved enough. But I had the truth on my side. I had witnesses, teachers, neighbors, friends who could vouch for me. I had evidence that showed I'd been the one taking care of Ryan while she was off sneaking around, plotting her escape. And I had Michelle, who was one of the best lawyers in the city. She'd already warned me that it wouldn't be easy, but she'd also said we had a solid case. That was enough to keep me going. By the time I finally looked up from the paperwork, the first light of dawn was creeping through the blinds. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the exhaustion settle in. But I couldn't rest yet. There was too much at stake. I put the folder back in my bag, poured another cup of coffee, and sat down again. I thought about Ryan, about the future I wanted to give him. I thought about the moments we'd had together, teaching him to ride a bike, helping him build his first model airplane, reading him bedtime stories. Those memories were what kept me going. Those memories were what I was fighting for. I had no doubt that Emily would keep coming at me. She'd try to spin her lies into something believable, try to convince the courts that she was the better parent. But I wasn't going to let her. I'd already lost too much my trust in her, the life we'd built together, the future I thought we had. I wasn't going to lose Ryan too. I wasn't going to let her take him from me. I was his father, and I knew what was best for him. Emily had made her choices. Now it was my turn to make mine. As the sun rose higher, the house felt different. It was still quiet, but it no longer felt suffocating. It felt lighter. I knew the battle wasn't over, but I also knew that I'd made it through another day. I'd taken another step toward reclaiming my life, toward giving Ryan the stability and love he deserved. I wasn't sure what the future would hold, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her destroy what mattered most. I was going to keep fighting, no matter how long it took, no matter how hard it got. For Ryan. For myself. For the chance to start over. So there it was, her carefully crafted plan exposed, her lies unraveled. But that wasn't the end. What would you do next? What steps would you take if you were in my shoes? Leave your comment below. I'm dying to know how you'd handle a betrayal like this. I learned the hard way that trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild. You can't rely solely on good intentions or a shared history to hold things together. Accountability matters. It's crucial to pay attention, to ask questions, and to address problems head-on before they spiral out of control. In any relationship, whether personal or societal, there must be honesty, transparency, and responsibility. We all have a role to play in creating a stable, trustworthy environment for ourselves, our families, and our communities. By choosing integrity over shortcuts, we build the foundation for a stronger, more united future.